There's a prison most men build for themselves, and they call it success. They call it being loved. They call it maturity. But here's what nobody tells you. Every time you bend yourself into a shape that earns someone else's approval, you're not growing. You're dying. Piece by piece, choice by choice, until one day you wake up and realize the person staring back at you in the mirror is a complete stranger. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the human psyche, and he discovered something that terrifies people when they truly understand it. The need for validation, that burning desire to be seen, approved, and accepted by others, isn't just a weakness. It's a psychological cancer that metastasizes through every area of your existence, turning you into a puppet whose strings are held by everyone except yourself. Right now, in this very moment, you're making decisions based on what others think. You're censoring your words, your dreams, your authentic self, all to maintain an image that isn't even real. And the most dangerous part? You've convinced yourself this is normal. This is what it means to be human. But what if I told you that the greatest minds in history discovered something different? What if the path to real power, real freedom, real fulfillment requires you to do the one thing society has programmed you to fear more than death itself? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will either liberate you completely or make you so uncomfortable you'll run back to your comfortable cage. Either way, you'll never see yourself the same way again. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask you wear to face the world. But here's the brutal truth most people never grasp. That mask isn't protecting you, it's suffocating you. Every human being constructs a persona, a carefully curated version of themselves designed to win approval from family, friends, society, strangers on the internet. You learn early what gets rewarded. Smile when you're supposed to smile. Laugh at jokes that aren't funny. Agree with opinions you don't hold. Suppress the parts of yourself that make others uncomfortable. And slowly, imperceptibly, the mask becomes your face. You forget there was ever anything underneath. Jung discovered something fascinating in his patients. The most successful people, those who had achieved everything society told them to want, were often the most miserable. They had optimized their personas so effectively that they had lost complete contact with their authentic selves. They were living someone else's life in their own body. The businessman who hates business but craves his father's approval. The doctor who wanted to be an artist but needed to be respected. The person who smiles constantly while screaming internally. Here's the first brutal danger of validation seeking. You become a collection of other people's expectations rather than a human being with your own desires. Think about your last major decision. Did you choose based on what you genuinely wanted? Or did you choose based on what would look good? What people would approve of? What wouldn't disappoint anyone? Most people can't even distinguish anymore. Their internal compass has been so thoroughly recalibrated by external approval that they've lost the ability to know what they actually want. Jung worked with a patient once, a successful lawyer who came to him with crippling depression. On paper, this man had everything: prestigious career, beautiful family, respect from everyone who knew him. But in their sessions, Jung discovered the truth. This man had wanted to be a musician. At 19, he had a choice: pursue music and face his family's disappointment, or become a lawyer and earn their pride. He chose approval. He spent 30 years building a life that impressed everyone except himself. Every morning he woke up in a prison he had constructed one approved decision at a time. You might be thinking, but we have to consider others. We can't just do whatever we want. And that's exactly the trap, because there's a vast difference between considering others and requiring their approval to exist. One is maturity. The other is psychological slavery. When you need validation, you give others power over your internal state. Your peace, your confidence, your sense of self-worth, all of it depends on whether people approve of your choices. You become a puppet, and every person in your life holds strings. They don't even have to pull them intentionally. You pull them yourself, constantly adjusting your behavior to maintain their approval. Watch how people behave on social media. They craft posts designed to generate likes, comments, validation from people they've never met and never will. They share not what's true for them, but what will be received well. They edit their lives into highlight reels that bear no resemblance to reality. And when the validation doesn't come, anxiety, depression, a sense of worthlessness, because they've outsourced their self-worth to an algorithm and the opinions of strangers. Jung called this psychic inflation, when your sense of self becomes dependent on external feedback rather than internal substance, and it creates a vicious cycle. The more you seek validation, the more you need it. The more you need it, the more you contort yourself to get it. The more you contort yourself, the further you drift from your authentic self, until you reach a point where you don't even know who you are without someone else's approval. Here's what happens to your decision-making capacity when you're addicted to validation. It completely disintegrates. You can't make a move without consulting the crowd, without testing which direction will earn you the most approval. Career decisions become about impressing others rather than fulfilling your potential. Relationship choices become about looking good as a couple rather than genuine connection. Even small daily choices, what to wear, what to eat, how to spend your time, all of it gets filtered through the question, what will people think? Friedrich Nietzsche, Jung's philosophical predecessor, understood this deeply. He talked about herd morality, the way most people simply absorb the values and judgments of those around them, without ever questioning whether those values actually serve them. The herd feels safe. The herd provides validation. But the herd is also heading toward a cliff, and they're taking you with them. Jung discovered that this validation dependency creates what he called neurosis, a split between who you are and who you pretend to be. And this split consumes enormous psychological energy. Think about how exhausting it is to maintain a false image. You're constantly monitoring yourself, editing your natural responses, calculating how to present yourself. It's like running a massive computer program in the background of your mind at all times, using up processing power that could be directed toward actual growth, creativity, achievement. The validation-addicted person wakes up every morning and immediately begins performing. Performing for their partner, their boss, their friends, their social media followers, even for themselves in the mirror. They're never off stage. They're never just existing. They're always being watched, judged, evaluated. And the watching eyes aren't even real most of the time. They're internalized versions of all the people whose approval they've learned to crave. Jung had a name for these internalized voices. Complexes, autonomous parts of the psyche that hijack your behavior. You might have a parent complex that makes you constantly seek approval from authority figures, or a peer complex that makes you desperate to fit in with whatever group you're around. These complexes run in the background, making decisions for you, pulling your strings without your conscious awareness. Here's the second brutal danger. Validation seeking makes you predictable, manipulable, and weak. When people know you need their approval, they own you. They can control your behavior simply by withholding or granting validation. Politicians know this. Advertisers know this. Manipulative people in your personal life definitely know this. They've learned that if they can control your sense of being approved of, they can control you completely. Think about relationships where one person constantly seeks validation from the other. Who has the power in that dynamic? Not the one seeking approval. They're dancing as fast as they can, constantly adjusting, constantly trying to earn love rather than simply being loved for who they are. The other person doesn't even have to be consciously manipulative. The power imbalance is built into the structure. One person needs, the other person grants or withholds. Jung observed that people who are psychologically healthy don't need constant external validation because they've developed what he called self-regulation, the ability to generate your own sense of worth, your own approval, your own judgment of whether you're living well. They have an internal compass that actually works. But here's what nobody tells you about developing that internal compass. It requires you to go through something terrifying. You have to stop caring what people think. Not in the sociopathic, I'll hurt anyone to get what I want sense, but in the liberating, I don't require your approval to exist sense. You have to be willing to disappoint people, to be misunderstood, to be judged and criticized and rejected, and still choose what's true for you. Most people would rather die than face that, literally. They'll spend their entire lives in quiet desperation, slowly suffocating under the weight of others' expectations, because the alternative, standing alone in their own truth, feels like death. But here's what Jung discovered, that death is actually rebirth. When you stop seeking validation, when you stop performing for the crowd, when you drop the mask and show your actual face, something extraordinary happens. You discover who you actually are, and that discovery changes everything. The person who emerges from this process isn't who you thought you were. They're someone more real, more powerful, more aligned with what Jung called the self, the totality of who you can become when you're not fragmenting yourself to please everyone else. But getting there requires walking through fire, and most people turn back the moment they feel the heat. Here's the third brutal danger of validation seeking. It turns you into a fraud in your own life. You become an actor playing a role, and you play it so well that you forget it's not real. Jung called this identification with the persona. You become so merged with the mask that you think the mask is you. And when someone threatens the mask, criticizes it, doesn't approve of it, you experience that as an existential threat. Because if the mask falls, what's underneath? Do you even exist without the approval? This is why criticism devastates validation seekers. They haven't developed a solid sense of self independent of others' opinions. So when someone disapproves, their entire identity wobbles. They might spend days, weeks, months ruminating over a single critical comment, trying to figure out how to adjust their mask to prevent future criticism. The whole orientation is external. Their center of gravity is outside themselves. Jung spent years studying mythology, fairy tales, and religious texts from cultures around the world, and he noticed a pattern. The hero's journey always involves a period of isolation, a time when the hero must face darkness alone, without the crowd's support, without external validation. Christ in the wilderness, Buddha under the Bodhi tree, every mythological hero descending into the underworld. This isn't coincidental. It's reflecting a psychological truth. Real transformation, real individuation as Jung called it, requires you to separate from the collective. You have to stop being defined by the group and discover who you are independent of others' judgments. This is terrifying for most people because humans are social animals. We evolved in tribes where being cast out meant death. That fear of social rejection is wired deep in your nervous system. When you imagine standing alone, disagreeing with the crowd, being judged or rejected, your body responds as if you're facing a life-threatening situation. Your heart races. Your palms sweat. Every instinct screams at you to conform, to seek approval, to get back in the tribe's good graces. But here's what's different now compared to our evolutionary past. Being rejected by the crowd doesn't actually threaten your survival anymore. You're not going to die if people don't approve of you. But your nervous system doesn't know that. It's still running ancient programming. And validation seekers are slaves to that programming, constantly performing to avoid the rejection their body believes will kill them. The fourth brutal danger is this. Validation seeking kills creativity, originality, and genuine contribution. Because anything truly creative, by definition, doesn't have pre-existing approval. It's new, it's different, it challenges the status quo. And the validation addicts can't create anything truly original because they need to know in advance that people will approve. They need the safety of consensus. So they create derivative work. They have derivative ideas. They live derivative lives. Everything is a slightly modified version of what's already been approved by others. There's no risk, no edge, no genuine self-expression. Just endless variations on themes that have already earned validation. Look at history's most creative individuals. The artists, inventors, philosophers, and visionaries who actually moved humanity forward. Were they seeking validation? Were they creating work designed to earn approval? Absolutely not. Most of them were rejected, criticized, and dismissed by the very people whose approval the masses were seeking. Van Gogh sold one painting in his lifetime. Nietzsche's work was ignored until after he went insane. Jung himself was expelled from Freud's circle for daring to disagree. These people created from internal necessity, not external approval. They had something inside them that demanded expression regardless of whether anyone understood or appreciated it. And because they weren't performing for the crowd, they created work that transcended their time, work that still resonates decades or centuries later. Meanwhile, the validation seekers of their eras, the ones creating safely within approved boundaries, are completely forgotten. Their work died with them because it never had real life to begin with. It was always just a performance designed to earn applause. Jung made a crucial distinction between the ego and the self. The ego is your conscious identity, the part of you that seeks validation, that wants to be special, approved, recognized. But the self is something much larger, the totality of your conscious and unconscious potential, everything you could become if you stopped fragmenting yourself for others' comfort. Individuation, Jung's term for psychological maturation, is the process of shifting your center from ego to self, from identification with others' opinions to alignment with your own deeper nature. And this process absolutely cannot happen while you're addicted to validation, because the self doesn't care about approval. It cares about truth, growth, becoming whole. The fifth brutal danger: validation seeking creates a false sense of connection while actually isolating you completely. You think you're connected because people approve of you, like you, accept you, but they don't actually know you. They know your mask. They like your performance. And on some level, you know this, which creates profound loneliness even in the middle of crowds. Jung called this the isolation of the false self. You're surrounded by people who like the version of you that you've created for them, but you're completely alone because nobody sees the real you. Nobody knows who you actually are beneath the performance, and you can't let them see, because you're terrified that if they saw the real you, they'd withdraw their approval. So you're trapped in a paradox. The more successfully you gain validation, the more isolated you actually become. Because the validation is for a fictional character, not for you. This is why successful people often report feeling empty despite having everything they thought they wanted. They've optimized for external validation so effectively that they've lost touch with internal reality. They're surrounded by people who admire them, but they feel completely alone because the admiration is for someone who doesn't actually exist. Here's what happens when you begin to break free from validation addiction. First, you experience withdrawal, severe psychological withdrawal, because you've been using others' approval as a drug to avoid facing yourself, and now you're cutting off the supply. You'll feel anxious, uncertain, unmoored. You'll desperately want to perform, to check whether people still approve, to get that hit of external validation that temporarily soothes your nervous system. But if you can sit with that discomfort instead of immediately medicating it with approval-seeking behavior, something shifts. You begin to discover that you don't actually need what you thought you needed. The world doesn't end when people disapprove. You don't disintegrate when criticized. You don't cease to exist when ignored. In fact, you exist more fully. Because for the first time, you're existing as yourself rather than as a reflection of others' expectations. Jung talked about the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've rejected and repressed because they didn't fit your persona, didn't earn approval. The validation addict has a massive shadow because they've had to reject huge portions of their authentic self to maintain their approved image. They've buried their anger, their desires, their unconventional thoughts, their real opinions, everything that might threaten their carefully constructed persona. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It just operates unconsciously, sabotaging you in ways you don't understand. You'll have inexplicable mood swings, strange compulsions, self-destructive behaviors, all stemming from rejected parts of yourself trying to break through the performance. The sixth brutal danger is this: validation seeking prevents you from accessing your own power. Because real power comes from integration, from owning all of who you are, including the parts that don't earn approval. When you're constantly censoring yourself, constantly performing, constantly seeking validation, you're operating at a fraction of your capacity. You're like an engine running on 2 cylinders when you have 8 available. The moment you stop seeking validation, you reclaim all that energy. The mental processing power you were using to maintain your false image becomes available for actual creation, actual growth, actual achievement. The emotional energy you were spending on anxiety about others' opinions can now flow toward your genuine goals. You become unified rather than fragmented, focused rather than scattered. This is what Jung meant by wholeness, not perfection, but integration. All parts of yourself working together rather than fighting each other. The monster you've been afraid to become when you stop seeking approval? That's actually the hero. The person you're capable of being when you're not performing for the crowd. The self-expressed, fully alive, creatively powerful human who exists beyond others' categories and expectations. But you'll never meet that person as long as you're addicted to validation. Because that person doesn't fit in approved boxes. That person makes people uncomfortable. That person threatens the status quo simply by existing authentically. And the validation addict would rather die than make people uncomfortable. The 7th and most brutal danger of validation seeking is this. It guarantees you will reach the end of your life with the devastating realization that you never actually lived. You performed. You pleased. You earned approval. But you never risked being who you actually were. You never created what was truly yours to create. You never said what was yours to say. You played it safe, colored inside the lines, and in doing so, you traded your one irreplaceable life for the comfort of being liked by people whose opinions don't even matter. Jung warned about this explicitly. He said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society says you should be, not who earns the most likes on social media. Who you actually are beneath all the conditioning, all the performance, all the desperate seeking of approval. But that journey requires something most people won't give. It requires you to stand alone, to face the disapproval, the criticism, the judgment, and still choose truth over comfort, to value your own internal alignment more than external validation, to become your own authority rather than constantly seeking permission from the crowd. Right now, you're at a choice point. You can close this video and go back to performing, go back to seeking approval. Go back to the comfortable prison of others' expectations. Nothing will change. You'll continue fragmenting yourself, continue exhausting yourself, maintaining false images, continue feeling that gnawing emptiness that comes from never actually showing up as yourself. Or you can choose something different. You can start the terrifying, liberating process of becoming real, of dropping the mask, of stopping the performance, of discovering who you actually are when you're not trying to earn anyone's approval. This path offers no guarantee of external success. In fact, it might cost you some relationships, some opportunities, some comfort. But it offers something infinitely more valuable. It offers you yourself, your energy, your power, your authentic life. The validation addicts will call this selfish. Let them. They're describing a threat to their own performance, not reality. The truth is that the most generous thing you can do for the world is become fully yourself, rather than remaining a half-alive performer seeking approval. Because when you're authentic, you give others permission to be authentic. When you stop performing, you release others from the pressure to perform for you. When you break free from validation addiction, you create space for real connection, rather than the false intimacy of mutual performance. Write in the comments, "I am enough without your approval," and watch what happens in your body when you declare this. Notice the resistance, notice the fear, notice the voice saying, "But what if people judge me for saying this?" That voice is your validation addiction speaking. And it's been controlling your entire life. Drop your approval of this message by hitting that subscribe button, not because you need my validation, but because you're choosing to align with content that challenges you to grow. Hit the like button as a declaration that you're done performing and ready to start becoming. Because here's what nobody tells you about this journey. The moment you stop seeking validation from others, you discover you never needed it in the first place. You were always whole, always complete, always enough. You just forgot while you were busy performing for the crowd. What comes next will shake everything you think you know about strength, about power, about what it means to be truly free in a world designed to keep you enslaved. The next video waiting for you reveals something most people spend their entire lives running from, and the few who face it discover a kind of freedom that changes everything. This journey doesn't end here, it's only beginning.